Hey team, it's Marty the OT Guy here, and today is our final Q&A video for 2024. So this question comes from a customer in the mining industry, and their question is all about zones, subnets, and queries. So let's take a look. Today's question arises from some professional services and a little bit of technical support work that we did with a customer recently, where they needed help to put together some queries and understand some data and analyzing some data that they received back from their network. And it was a really interesting use case that they had, and it brought up some really interesting query options and some interesting workflows. And I just thought it was good to share. And even though we can't share the customer's data or the complete specifics, there's some really good lessons in here. So if you are a Nozomi customer, hopefully what you'll find is some ideas or some memory joggers about nodes and subnets and zones and how different components of our system work together. You may also get some refresher on your query language. You might learn something new. If you're not a Nozomi customer and this is all new to you, then hopefully it'll give you an understanding of what we can do and how maybe we can help you in your environment. So today's demonstration is all about queries. And the initial question came from, how can we confirm that our network zones are correct across multiple guardians easily? And for the customer in question, we're talking hundreds of guardian appliances, lots and lots and lots, and all rolling up to individual central management consoles, rolling up to root CMCs and things. It's quite a large installation. And really what they wanted to be able to do was run a query at as fewer places as possible, ideally one, but possibly a few more. Run a query that gives them enough answers to then go forth and determine whether they have device configuration problems, network configuration problems, or a little bit of tidy up to do in their guardians or CMCs. So what we came back with were, we helped them put together different queries and different stages of queries as we went through the process that gave them the answers that they need and helped them to understand what configuration changes they could make on their Nozomi appliances to improve their performance, what configuration changes they needed to make on some devices in their network to stop some behavior that was less optimized than it could be, and even some hints on how to improve their network. So while I can't share the customer data, we can hopefully share the story and some of the learnings along the way, and maybe you'll find it interesting. So let's jump over to the lab. So we'll start here on the Guardian. We'll change over to the queries page, and we're going to run a fairly simple query that many users will run this kind of query quite often, right? It's pretty standard. So we're going to look at the nodes table, pull out some specific data fields, and then start triaging and analyzing our data and refining our query from there. So we'll execute the query. We got good data, nothing wrong with that. Let's start taking a look at what we see in here. Right on this very first row, we've got a node which has never sent any bytes and only received a few bytes, and its last activity time is never. This is what we would call a ghost node. This is some spurious address that's popped up from somewhere, and it doesn't exist in your network. So first thing we'll do, we got 19 pages of information here. If I add a count function to the end of this query, we've returned 457 nodes. So of that 457, a whole bunch of them look like they've never spoken, never had any activity, or they have 0 sent or 0 received bytes. There's a fair bit there. Okay, so how do we get rid of some of those? Let's start by going where sent bytes is not equal to 0 and where received bytes is also not equal to 0. There we go. We'll stick that count function on the end again, and now we're down to 197. So we've weeded out a lot of junk. Now, if your Guardian's set up properly and you've got your garbage collection set, you shouldn't really have a lot of ghost nodes hanging around. I've deliberately messed with this Guardian setup a bit so that I could accumulate some for this demonstration. So let's look further at this data. Right, what have we got here? Okay, there's some IPv6 addresses in there, and there's some MAC addresses in there. Well, they're not really much use to me. I don't need those. So how about we get rid of those too? So let's add another one and go where IPv4 IP address is not equal to an empty string. So we're running a function on the IP address to see whether it's an IPv4 address or not, and it will return data if it's IPv4. If it's not, it returns no data. So again, let's run the query. Okay, that thinned it out some more. We'll run the count, and now we're down to 105. So let's look at that data a bit further. Let's see what else is in there. So a smart move would be to make sure that we have no public nodes and no broadcast nodes in there. So we'll add those in as well. Let's go. Where is public equals false, and where is broadcast equals false. Okay, so now we're getting down to some sensible data here. And looking a bit further, let's look at the zones column a bit and say we have a lot of things here that have an undefined zone. Now, the undefined zone is a default zone within the Guardian for things that don't fall into defined zones. Which kind of makes sense when you think about it. So we have a lot of things here in the undefined zone. And then on the subnet column, we've got some things with subnets, but there's some nodes here that don't have subnets too. Yeah, there's all sorts. So these are the ones that the customer was kind of interested in. They were sort of going, well, why do we have things that aren't being properly assigned to zones? And how come sometimes we don't have subnet data? What's up with that? So what we'll do is we'll refine this even further, refine the query even further, so that we can just narrow in and home in on these devices. So we're going to add another where clause, and this time we're going to say where the zone equals undefined. And what are we down to now? Now we're down to 55 nodes that we need to investigate, or that we could investigate. Now with the subnet column, the subnet is populated depending on what protocols are in use. If it's a protocol that we know we can reliably extract the subnet information from, we'll populate the subnet column. If it can't be reliably extracted, it gets left empty. So at this point, you go, well, now I want to investigate my zones, or the customer is saying, now I want to investigate my zones. How can I take this information and thin it out even further to let me just see the zones that I need to check on? Okay, so the query I've pasted here is it's an extension of a query that we made a video about this time last year, actually. And we'll explain the query and then show how it's useful. So we start off, we're looking at the nodes table still. Fundamentally, this query is the same as what we were just using. So we're looking at the nodes table. We're saying, I want addresses that are not in the public address space. And that's the where is public equals false. We're saying we're excluding broadcast addresses. That's where is broadcast equals false. We want addresses that are only in the IPv4 range. Now, the next part is selecting the IP and the ID and using the split function to extract the individual octets from an IP address. And that takes us across. We have the first octet, second, third octet, and our final select statement uses a concatenate function to reassemble those octets and then add to the end, add a .0/24, and rename that as the subnet column. And then finally, we're grouping by the subnet. And we'll take the count out just for the moment. Let's just start there. So we look at the data that's returned now, and what we have is a list of subnets that are actually in use in our environment, because we're creating these subnet addresses from nodes that have observed traffic within the network. We can take this list and compare it to our zone configurations to see if the two match up. This is quite commonly used, or it's often used in new customer environments or new user environments, where you use the observed traffic or the traffic that is monitored during the learning phase with a Guardian, extract this information, and then create your zone configurations from that. Now, you may have good network documentation and the two line up perfectly, but it seems that quite often you'll find some random numbers coming up, random subnet numbers coming up or addresses coming up within your environment that don't line up with your documentation. And then you have that question of, is it real? Where is it coming from? What configuration is causing this? And what do I need to do to change it? And this is kind of where our customer got to. So the final thing we'll do here is let's just count our end result. And now we have 37 items to go chasing after. So we started with a big number, and now we've come down to 37 that we need to look into. And for the customer that asked this question, they are now able to go away and analyze the subnets that have come out of this, or they've been able to go away, analyze the subnets that came out of this little effort, and they've discovered some configuration issues. There were a couple of zones that they needed to create within their Guardian. There were some devices and some switches and routers and controllers and different things in their environment that were configured for address spaces that weren't in use. So overall, as they lead up to Christmas, the customer is able to use these queries and these skills to improve their environment and ensure that they go into their change freeze and go across their Christmas break where they have lower staffing levels and everyone's on holiday and relaxing and all those good things, a little bit more confident that there's less ghosts in the environment, less weird things that might throw alarms while everyone's trying to have a good time on break. Okay, so hopefully you learned a little something from that. Hopefully you found that interesting in some way. Look forward to seeing you all in 2025 when we kick off video content again. And yeah, for your holidays, if you're taking a break or whether you're working through, stay safe, enjoy your family, enjoy your holiday. We'll see you in 2025. I'm Marty the OT Guy from the Zomi Networks. Thanks for watching. Bye.